for many New Yorkers during the campaign, during the pandemic, I should say, that's in Albany right now. So, millionaire's tax, yes or no?
I would say we can't tax our way out of this. We can borrow our way out of this. And
Finance
all of
or
us going to have to contribute.
So that's a no. Finance or real estate industry campaign donations, would you accept? Are you accepting?
I will accept donations from all New Yorkers who are interested in the well-being of New York City.
And the rent cancellation, not just delay bill in Albany right now?
I think we need to make certain that New Yorkers who are already feeling the crunch, who are in really difficult circumstances, that we have some lifeline and some relief for those New Yorkers.
So that would include some rent or mortgage payment cancellation?
I would say, again, we need to make certain that we extend a lifeline, not only to the people who are suffering, but also to those small businesses that are suffering. So we need to find a way to make certain that the implications are implications that have the least negative effect on all of us.
30 seconds for anything you want to say on your way out the door.
I am honored to be here. I think I have a unique skill set, which is my lived experiences, my capabilities that I've learned over the years, my relationships, and my vision to stage the largest and most important comeback in the history of New York City. And I'm honored to be on your show with all of your listeners, and I so appreciate the invitation.
The newest mayoral hopeful entering the race as of today, Ray McGuire. Thanks so much for your time. As I say to all the candidates, good luck out there, and we'll talk to you again in 2021.
Thank you very much.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, where it's time for the latest news with David First. Hi, David. What's happening?
Thanks, Brian. Firefighters are responding to a 4-alarm fire in Englewood, New Jersey this morning. NBC News reports there was an explosion in a building on Banker Street. Black smoke from the incident was visible from Midtown Manhattan. The fire has prompted closures on the northbound side of Route 43 and detours on Route 4. The New York City Board of Elections officially certified the results of the November election yesterday. WNYC's Bridget Bergen has the numbers. And it sounds like we're having some difficulty getting the audio from Bridget Bergen. We'll see if we can get that just a little bit later. The final tally of absentee ballots has confirmed Republican Nicole Malliotakis confirmed that she beat Democratic first-term Congressman Max Rose in New York City. Rose conceded the race on November 12th, but the Associated Press did not declare Malliotakis the winner until late yesterday after absentee ballots were counted. Malliotakis defeated Rose in the congressional district that includes Staten Island and part of southern Brooklyn. And we may have audio. Let's see. The New York City Board of Elections officially did certify the results of the November election yesterday. WNYC's Bridget Bergen, do you have the numbers?
More than 3 million votes counted in the race for president and vice president this year. While more voters turned out than in the last 2 presidential contests, the percent turnout among all registered voters remained roughly the same at 55%. The final tally includes votes cast during early voting on Election Day, as well as a record-breaking number of absentee ballots made more readily available because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. While they accounted for just 4% of the total 4 years ago, this year mail-in ballots made up nearly a quarter of all votes cast. The city now sends its results to the state for certification on Thursday.
WNYC's Bridget Bergen. A study released by a federal monitor finds that police body cameras didn't change an officer's behavior, but WNYC's Yasmin Khan reports they do lead to more reporting of police stops that can be scrutinized.
The one-year study showed that NYPD officers wearing body cameras reported nearly 40% more stops than officers without them, but officers wearing cameras actually made unjustified stops at higher rates, possibly due to the increased reporting. The presence of body cameras also did not appear to have any effect on the number of arrests officers made or the amount of times they used force. The monitor's findings stem from a 2017 pilot project ordered by a judge who found the NYPD's stop and frisk practices to be unconstitutional. The NYPD said the study reflects outdated practices and added the cameras are key to transparency.
The MTA held the first of 8 virtual public hearings over its latest proposed fare and toll hikes yesterday. The agency is considering several scenarios that include eliminating the 7 and 30-day unlimited cards, as well as raising fares by 4%. But the issue that raised the most hackles at this first hearing was the possibility of eliminating the resident toll discount for Staten Islanders. Right now, Staten Islanders pay $5.50 to go across the Verrazano Bridge and back. It would cost them $19 without the discount or Easy Pass. Staten Island resident Elise Feldman spoke at the hearing.
That discount isn't something that's arbitrary. It's a discount so we could function and move off the island to go to work.
The MTA will make its final decision on any fare and toll increases early next year. 39 degrees now, cloudy this morning, becoming sunny this afternoon, a high of 47 degrees. This is WNYC.
On the next All of It, a new documentary called Mayor follows Musa Hadid, the mayor of Ramallah in the West Bank, for 2 years as he leads the de facto capital of Palestine. Director David Ossip joins us. Plus, Becky Cooper on her new book, We Keep the Dead Close, about the 1969 murder of a Harvard graduate student and the university's alleged efforts to silence the investigation. Tune into All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include St. Francis Heart Center. Their approach to heart and healthcare is rooted in high science, and their culture is built upon human understanding. More at chscardiology.org. Bowery Residents Committee, helping people reclaim lives lost. BRC works to restore hope and dignity by offering opportunities for health and self-sufficiency. Learn more about helping New Yorkers in need at brc.org. Mohawk Mountain House, presenting Hudson Valley Getaway, Sunday through Thursday this winter. Packages include 2 or 3 meals daily, guided hiking, wellness sessions, and more. Mohawk.com. Bottle Rocket Wine and Spirit, now offering nationwide gift shipping to clients, friends, and family. Personal consultations, wrapping, and gift notes available online at bottlerocket.com or in store on 19th Street near 5th Avenue.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. WNYC's Matt Katz, who's been co-hosting, who's been sub-hosting all of it this week for Allison Taylor, is also out there as a reporter on a very important story in our area that some of you know about and some of you don't. It's a hunger strike and other developments at immigration detention facilities in our area, in New Jersey in particular. The hunger strike and protests are in Bergen County. There's a COVID outbreak at a facility in Elizabeth, and there's a key vote by freeholders in Hudson County to maintain a contract with ICE that they had announced would be ending. So, Matt Katz joins us, and we'll also be joined in a couple of minutes by a man recently released from the Bergen County facility. Hi, Matt. How you doing?
Hey there, Brian. Good morning. Yeah, it's been a dramatic couple of weeks in ICE detention in our area.
Tell us about that hunger strike first. Who's striking?
This has now been going on for 19 days, 2.5 weeks. We now know there are 8 people involved. There were more. And these detainees, they're immigration detainees, so they're waiting on their hearings on their immigration cases. Some have legal documents to stay in the country, but they were convicted of crimes, served their sentences, and are now deportable. So while they await hearings on that, they are held in jail instead of being released to await their court dates. Others are asylum seekers who don't have papers at all, so they're awaiting court dates, and they want out. Many have been in there for more than a year, sometimes 2 years, and they complain about conditions. Several of them have complicated medical issues that they say the doctors at the facility in Bergen County, which is run by the Bergen County Sheriff's Office, can't help them with. And they're feeling now that this is their only way out. So one of them told me he wants to be deported, but his country isn't accepting him back right now. He's in this kind of like purgatory. This is the second different hunger strike this month at the Bergen County Jail, and the detainees are telling me that they're increasingly sick. Obviously, that they're not eating. They are drinking water. There are these sinks that are attached to the toilet in their cells, so they're drinking water from there. And as you mentioned, there have been now protests outside the facility. It began with a group of rabbis last Friday, I believe, and every couple of days, more protesters show up outside the jail. As a result, we saw yesterday in footage of a protest that the jail actually blocked the windows, so the detainees on hunger strike inside presumably can't see out, which also means they can't see the protesters, but maybe also can't see sunlight. The Bergen County Sheriff's Office has stopped responding to my questions about this. There have been several questions I've had. I've also heard that heat has been cut off, but we have not been able to get any verification on that because the Sheriff's Office is not talking any longer. All I'm getting is confirmation from ICE that the hunger strike is continuing.
Who is the hunger strike and the protest aimed at? It's an unusual time for this in a certain respect, since this is a detention facility that has to do with federal policy, because the Trump administration, which obviously has been so tough on undocumented immigrants, is on its way out of office. The Biden administration doesn't have any power yet, but they will be on their way in and might have a different policy or not. But is it aimed at either of them, or is it aimed more at local officials?
I've asked that very question because the detainees will complain about the conditions at the jail, which is run by local officials. Bergen County is a Democratic county, and the sheriff's office, the elected Democratic sheriff there, runs the jail. And they complain about rats and mice and lack of outside recreation time and the amount of time that they're locked in their cells and semi-solitary confinement and the poor food and medical conditions. So they complain about that, but they say their real gripe and the reason for the strike is actually aimed at ICE. There was a federal injunction earlier during the quarantine that mandated that ICE identify medically vulnerable detainees who can be released due to COVID, and they want release under that. And they say ICE is not taking their claims seriously, that they don't have proper protections, they cannot social distance in jail, and that they have medical issues and they are susceptible to COVID-19. The first ICE detainee in the country to test positive for coronavirus was at the Bergen County Jail. So they're fearful of COVID and they want ICE to review their files and release them based on that. And that's who this is aimed at primarily.
Also joining us for a few minutes with WNYC's Matt Katz is Marcial Morales, who was recently released from the Bergen County facility. Marcial, thanks for coming on WNYC for a few minutes. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I see you participated in a hunger strike before your release. What were you striking for?
Well, it's a lawsuit the immigrants won against ICE, so anybody has big medical issues should be identified and released. I filed my FRIHAT, but I was denied, and I did it for several times and was denied, so I had to push it a little bit hard. I went to hunger strike, and then eventually they granted.
So you think your release was connected to you going on a hunger strike?
Yes.
Can you talk about the conditions at the facility in Bergen County that you experienced or witnessed?
Yeah, Bergen County Jail is a very terrible place to be. There is no clean water to drink, rats everywhere, the place is filthy, and ladder leaks everywhere, and all the staff there, they abuse their power they treat everybody like criminals. We are detainees, not a criminal, so it's a very bad place to be.
What's your immigration status now, and what's next for you?
For me right now, I am appealing my case at the BIA, so now I have to wait, see what happens.
So Marcial Morales, thank you very much for joining us for a few minutes, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And Matt Katz, do you want to put his story in context for us? And when he talks about being a detainee, not a prisoner, and you mentioned that distinction too, I think a lot of people don't understand that. Why are they behind bars if they're not criminals in the first place, not accused criminals even?
It's simply to make sure that they show up to their court dates, their immigration court dates. They are not being punished for anything. Some of them have crimes and have convictions for crimes, but they've already served time in state prison, for example, for those crimes. But once they committed the crimes, that made them deportable under immigration law. But they have to go through a process to see if they will indeed be deported, because they have a right to fight that. To make sure that they show up to immigration court, ICE locks them up. This is a relatively new phenomenon in the U.S. We've only been doing this for about 20, 25 years, and it's really ramped up, obviously, over the last several years. So that's why they make a distinction. They are not, unlike other people served in the same jail, they're not there based on a crime. They're there based on this violation, this immigration violation, alleged immigration violation. And, Marcial is out on an ankle monitor, and that's what is making sure that he shows up to court. His ankle monitor monitors his movements, and that's why ICE knows where he is, and he has to check in with them, and that's what these other guys want. And Marcial has become something of an inspiration to the other hunger strikers, because he did go on hunger strike and then was released. And that might be why ICE is not necessarily going to release the guys currently on hunger strike, because it could have an effect on the rest of the population. The one other option that ICE has, a couple of years ago, I did a story about a guy held at the Bergen County Jail who went on hunger strike, and he was transferred to El Paso, where ICE was able to get a judge there to order force feeding, and he was held down for several days, and food was put through his nose by tubes while he was held down by nurses and officers. So that is something that possibly awaits the hunger strikers. And I'll add one more piece of context to what Marcial was saying. He was complaining about the conditions there, and I will say that the sheriff's office has said that they do clean the facility. It is very clean, and that the sheriff told me that he never knew about a rat problem there. I mean, I've heard this many times that there's rats, but the sheriff's office denies it for whatever that's worth.
So you're reporting on these immigration detention facilities in 3 counties, Bergen and Union and Hudson. We've been talking primarily so far about the one in Bergen County that Marcial was held at. At the one in Union County in Elizabeth, COVID-19 is evidently a big problem. What are you reporting from there?
Yeah, I've been hearing from guys inside of there. That's a privately run facility run by the company Core Civic. So far, 10 detainees are positive. A medical staffer there has died, and this is only just over the last few weeks. The people there describe that the whole place is now in quarantine, that sanitation has been an issue, like they use the thumb monitors to check their oxygen levels, but they don't sanitize between usages. There's not a regular change out of the masks that they use. There's issues in terms of sanitizing and social distancing, and now the disease has really spread there. This would be considered an outbreak. So 10 so far at Elizabeth, the privately run detention center, but most of the detainees from our area, from New York and New Jersey, are held in county jails in New Jersey. So that's Bergen, which we talked about, Essex County in Newark. They have a few hundred ICE detainees. And then the last one is Hudson. And then you mentioned this in your introduction there, Brian. They were supposed to pull out of their ICE contract. They announced in 2018 that by this month, that by the end of 2020, they would end their ICE contract. And that's because Hudson is almost 50% foreign born. It's very democratic. The entire county board there, the freeholders, which will soon become the county commissioners, they're all Democrats. And they were announced under pressure 2 years ago that they were ending their ICE contract. And that's because of all the stuff we've heard this morning, like complaints about conditions, ICE, etc. Well, they changed their mind last week, and they have now approved a new 10-year contract with ICE.
What? Why?
Yeah, 10 years. So it's a good question. I listened in on the meeting. It was a Zoom meeting of the Freeholder Board last week. It was 12 hours long, the longest New Jersey government meeting I've ever attended. And you know, Brian, I've been to a lot of New Jersey government meetings. And not a single resident, not a single person who called in to speak to the board spoke in favor of the contract. There were more than 150 people who spoke, and everybody was against it. In very passionate tones. I mean, there were former detainees complaining of being raped and abused inside the jail. There were immigrants who likened ICE detention to the Holocaust. It was extremely dramatic, but there was very little comment from the freeholder board, the one who eventually approved the contract despite the opposition. What they did say is that they would rather have the immigrants who are detained there would rather be near their lawyers who are in New York and New Jersey and near their family in New York and New Jersey rather than being shipped off to another detention center around the country if the Hudson facility were to close. But the other reason, and I know this because I spoke to the spokesman for Hudson County Executive Tom DeGise, who was not at the meeting, but he was the one driving this. He's also a Democrat. The other reason is that they need the money, and they get $120 a day per immigrant who's detained there. And they say that they need that to help balance the budget during a time of COVID. Taxes are going to go up anyway, and this will help to prevent a bigger tax increase. So that then became something that the people against the ICE contract found quite problematic. That we shouldn't be Democrats, particularly in the end of the Trump era, should not be making money off the ICE deportation machine. But that's exactly what they're doing. And the way it works in New Jersey, there's a Democratic machine, and I've asked for a comment from the very anti-Trump Democrats in New Jersey about what they think about Democrats in New Jersey having these ICE contracts. And I got no comment back from Governor Murphy's office, nothing from Senator Menendez, nothing from Senator Booker. I couldn't get an interview with the Hudson County Executive, Tom DeGise. I mean, they have a hold on these things, and they're hoping they're able to push off any sort of anti-ICE progressive Democrats who might have a problem with that. And they think the ICE contract in general will be less controversial in a Biden era because Joe Biden presumably will run a ICE agency that is kinder and gentler.
And your story on this disturbingly pointed out that not all the freeholders who took this vote seem to even understand who ICE is detaining. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was actually a protest last night. Anthony Romano, who's one of the freeholders, one of the Democratic freeholders, and he was having a fundraiser. So a lot of anti-ICE protesters showed up, and he was interviewed outside the fundraiser by a Hudson County TV station. And he said, well, everybody inside is serving time for serious crimes, or they've been convicted of serious crimes. And it's simply not the case. Some just don't have immigration papers, but have no other criminal charges, and immigration violations are considered something along the lines of a misdemeanor. It's not a serious crime. And others who have committed serious crimes, and there are people who have committed serious crimes in ICE detention, violent crimes, they've already served time for that. They've already been in prison for several years for that. In many cases, people have ended up in ICE detention because it takes so long, the system is so clogged up. They've been in ICE detention far longer than they were in prison for the crime that they actually committed. So it's clear that the freeholders, time and again during the meeting and then in comments afterwards, don't really completely understand the role of ICE detention, which is simply to make sure people show up to their immigration court dates.
Before we run out of time, can I go back to the detention center in Elizabeth, where you said there was a COVID-19 outbreak? Were any detainees released for their safety?
Not that we know of. We do know that earlier during the quarantine, there were a bunch of detainees released based on these court mandates that ICE review their files, and there were humanitarian releases. But since then, that has seemed to have stopped happening in our area. In fact, I reported on a guy who was released. He's elderly. He's got medical issues. He's been in the country for 30 years, but he had committed some drug crimes. So they're trying to deport him. He was actually released in the beginning of the quarantine, at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, on humanitarian purposes. And then he was suddenly just rearrested. He hadn't committed any other crime. He was just rearrested a few weeks ago. Picked up again and sent back to detention, even though obviously we're experiencing this second wave, and COVID outbreak is still a major concern in any jail, let alone ICE detention.
So last question, have you gotten to put a question yet to anybody from the Biden transition about whether they will treat detainees at these New Jersey ICE facilities differently than they're being treated under Trump?
I have not, but we do know that that Biden has said he's going to put a halt on deportations, that they won't be doing the same sort of arrests that ICE under Trump did. So ICE under Trump arrests not just people with criminal charges, but anybody they might encounter who doesn't have documents. So those forwarded arrests, as ICE calls them, that is supposedly going to stop under Biden. So presumably there will be fewer people coming into ICE detention in a Biden administration, but I can't see how that has any immediate effect for people already in the system. These contracts are signed and sealed with ICE for another 10 years. I mean, one of the freeholders who voted against the ICE contract in Hudson said, if we close our facility, then ICE will pressure the Biden administration to make fewer arrests, and that'll contribute to a shrinking of the criminalization of immigration. But the system and the bureaucracy is now so entrenched that it's hard to imagine that ICE detention doesn't continue in much of the same way, at least in the near future, even under Biden.
Matt Katz covers immigration and hate crimes for WNYC and Gothamist, and is the author of the book American Governor, Chris Christie's Bridge to Redemption. Matt, thanks a lot.
Appreciate the time, Brian.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, much more to come.
Throughout the pandemic, we've watched the number of COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths keep rising. But it can be hard to assess our individual risks.
There is a myth that we take in data, we compute it, and we come out with the right decision. That's not how humans actually decide.
Making sense of risk this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4 on WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from Columbia University, offering an online talk on art, design, and tech by people of color on December 10th at 6 p.m. Info and RSVP at sps.columbia.edu/community. WNYC is a media partner of Brooklyn Public Library, presenting Message from the Library, a lecture by artist and writer Molly Crabapple on today's critical issues, December 13th, bklynlibrary.org/BPL presents.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and we'll turn now to an international story that some of you know is going on and some of you don't, but that is definitely worthy of more exposure. It even follows up on last year's Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 was awarded to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, quote, for his efforts to achieve peace and international cooperation, and in particular for his decisive initiative to resolve the border conflict with neighboring Eritrea. Now, Ethiopia is in the midst of its largest conflict in nearly 30 years, despite that peace prize. On November 4th, the northern region of Tigray revolted, declaring itself a breakaway state. In response, Prime Minister Ahmed announced a state of emergency, deploying the military into the region. This past Sunday, Abiy declared the operation completed after government forces recaptured Tigray's regional capital of Mekelle, following a 72-hour ultimatum for the rebels to surrender. The fighting continues in the region, and a communications blackout that began at the opening of hostilities is still in place. Now, Ethiopia is the second largest country in Africa by population. The African Union, the economic and political organization to which all African nations belong, is headquartered in Addis Ababa, the capital. Any unrest carries with it implications that affect not only Ethiopia, but the entire continent. So here to talk about those implications is Tom Gardner, Addis Ababa correspondent for The Economist. Tom, thank you for joining us. Hello from New York.
Hi, Brian.
And listeners, if we have any Ethiopian listeners there right now, out there right now in particular, we would love to hear from you. Let everybody else in our listening area know what's going on in your country of origin, or maybe the country that your parents or grandparents or whoever came from. 646-435-7280. Help us report this story. Listeners with any kinds of ties to Ethiopia, what's important here that the rest of the world should know about more than they do? 646-435-7280. 7280, or since we laid this out as having implications for the entire continent of Africa, really anybody with any ties to anywhere in Africa, if you're following this war in Ethiopia, give us a call with a question for Tom Gardner in Addis Ababa for The Economist, or with your take, 646-435-7280, 646-435-7280. Do you want to background us a little bit on the Prime Minister and the one thing that people may have heard who don't follow news from Ethiopia, that he won the Nobel Peace Prize last year? What was that for, and how does it relate to what's going on today?
Sure. So Abiy came to power in 2018. He came to power off the back of mass protests in his region, his home region of Oromia, and also to an extent in Amhara region, which neighbors Tigray. And they were protesting against many things, but one key point was they were opposed to the dominance, really, of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, which is the ruling party in Tigray, which is now at war with Abiy. And when he came to power, he started, at least on paper, democratizing. He released political prisoners. He unmuzzled the press. He started a kind of economic liberalization agenda. He also started to sideline and downsize the TPLF in this federal government in Addis Ababa. He also, 2 months after becoming prime minister, made peace with Eritrea. Now, Eritrea is the country to the north of Tigray, which Ethiopia went to war with in 1998-2000, an incredibly bloody war. But Eritrea, and this is quite important, was part of Ethiopia up until 1993. And the Eritrean rebels, liberation rebels, fought alongside the TPLF in the 1970s and 1980s against the central government in Addis Ababa, and they have a very complicated, tempestuous history, particularly the president of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki. His relationship with the TPLF is very bitter. So when Abiy made peace with Eritrea, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize the following year for that, what people didn't really understand at the time was that this was also something of a security pact signed between Abiy and Isaias. And it was certainly seen that way in Tigray. They saw this as essentially an alliance to sideline and pressure them, ultimately, so Isaias could exact the revenge for Eritrea's defeat 2 decades earlier. So it's a very complicated history. But fast forward to today, the Tigrayan leadership has been kind of what was for the last 2 years, essentially holed up in Tigray, in its regional capital Mekelle. Tensions with Addis and with Abiy had been mounting, and they certainly felt encircled because to their north was Isaias and his forces. And again, it's a complicated story, and both sides have played a role. All sides really have played a role in escalating things. But in September of this year, the TPLF went ahead and held regional elections against in defiance of Abiy and the federal government, which had postponed those elections, the national elections, because of COVID. They went ahead, held these elections, and you kind of enter this kind of game of mutual delegitimization on both sides. The TPLF said Abiy is an illegitimate, illegal dictator bent on, dismantling the constitution and turning himself into a dictator, and the Abiy and his allies were calling the TPLF essentially a renegade junta, is now the name they use. And then on November the 4th, the war began.
And can you talk about the human toll here? As of a week ago, the numbers I'm seeing are that 40,000 refugees from the Tigray region have fled to Sudan. The Tigray region itself is host to over 100,000 Eritrean refugees. I've heard reports of mass slaughter. I don't know if those can be confirmed. So how is this conflict affecting the already critical refugee crisis in Ethiopia, and what human toll is it taking even in addition to that?
Well, yeah, so you've got two things there, really. You've got the Eritrean, quite a sizable population of Eritrean refugees, as you mentioned, about 100,000, who are in Tigray. They've been fleeing the dictatorship of Isaias Afwerki across the border. They've been there for many years. They're now basically trapped in the middle of this conflict, and from what I hear, they have been caught literally in the crossfire. We know there have been serious bloodshed there. They've also been denied food supplies, medical supplies. That, I should say, applies to the whole of Tigray, which has been essentially cut off from humanitarian access since the war began, although there are some signs now that there will be a bit more access. The UN says it has agreed a deal, at least to be able to access some of the areas that the federal government has liberated. So that's one problem. Then you have the plight of Tigrayan refugees who crossed into neighboring Sudan. As you said, there are about 45,000 according to the UN at the latest count. Now that's very troubling. Equally troubling is the fact that in the last week we have had reports that the border has been essentially blocked by the Ethiopian military to prevent more Tigrayan refugees entering Sudan. So there is this kind of suffocation of Tigray is something that many people are very alarmed about. And then you mentioned the massacres or atrocities, and these are, yes, very hard to know the true details of. The Amnesty International reported or confirmed that there was indeed a particularly appalling massacre, about 600 or so civilians slaughtered on November the 9th. Now, we don't really know the full details of what happened. It does seem it was mostly Amhara civilians who were killed. That's according to both Amnesty and to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, who did manage to send some investigators there. Amhara, for the listeners who don't know, is the neighboring state on the west and south of Tigray, which has disputed territories, territorial claims, and so the kind of ethnic dimension to that fighting has been something that has been really alarming. And I do think it seems from the reports we're hearing from refugees, Tigrayan refugees in Sudan, that it has gone both ways, that there have been kind of ethnic militias involved in targeting civilians from both sides. So you're going to have a large population of refugees, Tigrayan refugees in Sudan, who are going to be very apprehensive, I think, about returning. The Ethiopian government has said they want to welcome them back as soon as possible, but there is going to be, and I'm told from refugees there, that they really fear retaliation. So that's another thing to watch, and certainly I know that Sudanese authorities are quite concerned about the prospect of prolonged displacement and a prolonged refugee problem on their border.
Let's take a phone call. Abby in South Plainfield, you're on WNYC. Hi, Abby.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. This is an extremely important discussion, and I'm so glad you're covering it, Brian. I listen to you every day, and it's great. I am an Ethiopian origin, and what's happening in Ethiopia, the world has to pay extremely close attention, because right now what's happening is brothers killing brothers, and there's no difference between the two people, Eritrea or Tigray or the rest of it. And what's happening is human tragedy. The Amharas are being killed and slaughtered. ISIS has, forget it. You would think ISIS was bad. What's happening in Ethiopia is extremely I can't even comprehend it, because this is my family, my heritage, and everything that's there. And we all have to pay attention to what's going on, because if we don't stop this ethnic fight between each other, there's no end to it. Today is Tigray, and tomorrow is Amhara, and then Oromo, and what? There's no end to it. And I understand Dr. Abiy, he has no choice at this point of the game, because he was forced to it. But this has to stop. The world has to pay attention, because the implication will include the whole continent of Africa and beyond. Because Ethiopia, with the Abiy, with the dam that's happening, with conflict with Egypt and Sudan, I can't even tell you. So this is something that the world must pay attention to.
Abby, thank you so much, and for making it clear to a lot of other listeners what some of the broader implications are. And let's take another call. Robert in Brooklyn. You're on WNYC. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Brian, Mr. Thank you, my God. Hello, all you audience listeners. Listen, the problem of Ethiopia is a very, very troubling problem. I have family there, but I'm here in Brooklyn. I got family in the Bronx too, but most of my family over there in Ethiopia. So,
what would you like to see done, Robert? What would you like to see done?
I want to send them some money, but there's no internet. There's no contact.
Were you able to send them money in the past, and the recent fighting has cut off those lines?
Yes.
Robert, so there's an additional problem that I hadn't known about before. Remittances not being able to get sent to people there who might really need the money from relatives here. Were you aware of that? Tom Gardner from The Economist.
Sorry, me. Yeah. Yes, no, I was aware of that. There are two issues here. So the banks in Tigray were closed at the start of the conflict, putatively, according to the federal government, because there had been looting by Tigrayan forces there. So people have not been able to access their money. Then, after about 10 days into the conflict, they were reopened, but only manually. So ATMs didn't work, and I'm not entirely sure what the exact circumstances are now for people there. They want to access remittances, but I do know an additional problem which we might talk about later, and this is regards to kind of ethnic profiling of Tigrayans in ordinary Tigrayans, both in Tigray and in Addis and elsewhere. But the National Bank of Ethiopia actually froze bank accounts opened in Tigray, or maybe it was specifically Mekelle, but essentially people here in Addis have not been able to send money or deposit money in their bank accounts or withdraw money from the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. That's something I've been hearing from quite a few different people here in Addis. So there is definitely a problem with regards to ordinary Tigrayans being able to access money, and that's one of the reasons why the humanitarian community in the UN is so concerned really about food supplies and kind of basic living conditions in Tigray.
To the first caller's concern, her emotional plea from the heart about brother killing brother, I see that the Ethiopian government runs on a policy that they call ethnic federalism. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So ethnic federalism, or it's also known to its supporters as multinational federalism, is basically the constitutional federal settlement which was introduced in 1995 by the TPLF and its allies, which came to power in 1991 after a long guerrilla struggle that I alluded to earlier. What it does, and it is very controversial, is it essentially divided up the country into ethnically defined regions like Amhara, Tigray, Oromia, and others. There are 10 of them. They have sort of semi-sovereign powers, including, and this is the kind of key provision, self-determination up to secession. So every regional state basically has the right to secede, and importantly, it was on that basis that Eritrea seceded in 1993, and it's really, for some, it's probably the most controversial and bitterly contested issue in Ethiopian politics. It is the key fault line between those who support it and those who oppose it. And some people will argue that this is essentially what this war has really been fought over. And it's controversial because it essentially institutionalizes ethnic identity. Its supporters will say it merely recognizes, nations and nationalities, something like maybe the former Soviet Union or other kind of ethnic federations like that. It says, you know, Tigray is a nation, Amhara, it's a nation, Oromia, these are nations, and the only way that they can live together is if they have these kind of sovereign powers. But to its opponents, yes, this is the cause of all these interethnic conflicts because it makes politics about identity. It makes the key dividing line in all politics, ethnicity or nationality, or whatever you want to think, however you want to think about it. And over the last 30 years, but certainly in the last 2 years, there have been extraordinary intercommunal, interethnic conflicts, which have displaced and killed. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in the last 2-3 years alone.
We have 2 minutes left in this segment. Let me get one caller in here, in addition to the ones that we've had from West Africa, originally Nigeria, and I think he's going to help us understand why there are such huge implications to this beyond even what's going on in Ethiopia itself, which, for those who don't know the map of Africa, is in East Africa. So, Lucas in Mount Vernon, you're on WNYC. Thank you so much, and we have 1 minute for your call.
Hi, thank you, Brian. I'm a long-time listener. I think, first of all, I think Abiy should be stripped of his Nobel Peace Prize because he's not a man of peace. An average African leader, they like to power trip. This is their ego in play. Let's go back to the creation of an all-African country. We are different tribes being caught together. Like I'm a Nigerian. I'm Yoruba by tribe. I have Yoruba in Benin Republic, and they are not Nigerians. And I'm in a country with Igbo, Hausa. Hausas have more Fulani people in Niger and Chad. Look, for example, the last NSAS protest in Nigeria. The youth came out peacefully to protest police brutality. And the president sent military men to kill these guys. As long as the West refuse to punish all African leaders that do this, that kill their people with impunity, it's still going to continue.
And Lucas, I have to leave it there because we are out of time. But Tom, as we end, Lucas makes a very important point. He says as long as the West continues to allow this to happen, it will continue to go on. You report for The Economist, British-based publication. I'm here in the United States. We're about to have a change of administration. What is the role of the West, and what could it be?
Well, I think I should start by saying I think the external powers have rather limited leverage or influence in Ethiopia, particularly. And this is a country which really cherishes its national sovereignty. This is a country which was never colonized, famously defeated the Italians. It really does not take kindly to outsiders intruding. So there's always a kind of basic limitation to what outsiders can do. I know that the Europeans are mulling potentially withdrawing or cutting aid in order to try and pressure both sides to stop fighting. I don't think the Americans have a great deal of the Trump administration is somewhat blown its kind of leverage by cutting aid earlier this year over the Nile Dam dispute with Egypt, which caller Abiy referred to earlier. So I don't think the Americans at the moment are really best placed.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, this is probably something that's going to have to be resolved internally, or with the help of the African Union, which I think is probably the best forum for external pressure.
Tom Gardner, Addis Ababa correspondent for The Economist. Thank you, and thanks to our callers for letting a lot of other listeners who are not familiar with what's been going on in Ethiopia learn a little more about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. More to come.
In the world of social media, calling someone out can be a powerful weapon. But maybe there's a different way of disagreeing.
Calling in is going to be to the 21st century and our social justice practices like nonviolence was in the 20th century.
Professor Loretta J. Ross on calling in instead of calling out and what her civil rights activism teaches us about combating hate online. I'm Tanzina Vega, and that's next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC is supported by Geico Insurance, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. Geico can also help insure motorcycles, RVs, homes, and more. More at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. The Vital Projects Fund, supporting the Museum of Modern Art, presenting Fall Reveal. Hundreds of new works to explore now on view. Bank of America is the lead collection partner. More info and time tickets at MoMA.org. The virtual Other Israel Film Festival, presented by the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, an in-depth look into Israeli and Palestinian societies through films and conversations, December 3rd through 10th. More at otherisrael.org.
Coming up at noon on All of It, the story behind the 1969 murder of a Harvard graduate student and the university's alleged efforts to silence the investigation, with Becky Cooper, author of the new book, We Keep the Dead Close. Plus, a look at the movement to arm teachers across the U.S. Coming up at noon on 93.9 FM, AM 820, or ask your smart speaker to play WNYC.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
WNYC, and now we continue our 10-part end-of-year gratitude series with 10 heroes of community well-being for 2020. I'll also remind you of the related live Zoom event next Wednesday night, a week from tonight, December 9th, to honor 3 of those champions of community well-being with what the station is generously calling the Lehrer Prize for Community Well-Being. You can make a free reservation to Zoom attend that event at wnyc.org/Lehrer Prize. Today we meet one of the 3 finalists, and that is the leader of the group Health for Youths, an organization which works to, quote, combat juvenile delinquency through programs and workshops on education, healthcare, and life skills training throughout New York City. So I'm joined by Heather Butts, professor at LIU and a lecturer at Columbia University School of Public Health and co-founder of Health for Youths. Heather, welcome to WNYC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear just fine, and I know Health for Youths is an acronym, so you want to tell us what it stands for?
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but it stands for Health, Education, Academic, Life Skill Training, Health for Youth, like my cousin Minnie Youth. F on the end. And the acronym basically is the way in which we mark how we do the work that we do in a holistic manner.
We talked yesterday to another guest in this series whose work focuses particularly on 6 to 13-year-old girls.
Mm-hmm.
Your work focuses on an older age group that often falls through the cracks, right?
That you completely got it, absolutely. And I also want to tell you, I love your show. I actually listened to the episode yesterday and listened to the other nominees. So, I feel like I'm in a very esteemed group. And it's such an honor to be nominated. So I just wanted to thank you and your show and WNYC for the nomination. And yes, I did listen to the other nomination yesterday, and it was very interesting to hear what she had to say, because the reasons why she talked about why she wanted to work with that population, it's the very reasons why I actually started Health for Youth, because we often think about, young people 0 through 6, 6 through 13, that group who they do get a decent amount of attention, and a lot of the nonprofit work is very much geared towards them. But once you have young people that hit age 18, they really do fall through the cracks. And whether that's young people who are in foster care or are homeless or have been homeless or somehow otherwise quite involved, they often don't get the level of attention that they need. And so I said to myself, if I ever started a nonprofit, that's the age group that I wanted to work with.
So 18 to 21. And your programs seem to range so widely, from virtual soccer during the pandemic to the Little Libraries program that people may have heard of and didn't realize that you were so involved with it, that places books and now food around the city during the pandemic, to an environmental program that ranges down to Lake Como near the Jersey Shore. How do you decide what to include?